Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Mission Employable podcast, where we talk all things workforce here in Iowa. I'm Kathy Leggett, your host for today's show. My co-host, I'm sure you're wondering where he is at this point. My co-host, Ben, is on a much-deserved vacation, and so we'll just look forward to having him back next time on the show. So today we're going to talk about entrepreneurship, and this is going to be really interesting, I think, for multiple different perspectives. Finding opportunity in Iowa is a common theme on our podcast, and especially because Iowa ranks high on the national scale in terms of economic opportunity and affordability. So we want to make sure we get that word out because we want people to come here and know that we have something for them, whether it's entrepreneurship, other opportunities in the workforce. You want it, we've got it. Today's show highlights the opportunities for entrepreneurs, and we're talking to Diana Wright from the Des Moines Partnership. And so welcome, Diana.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So glad to have you. This is an exciting and interesting topic for us. So first, what we're going to do is have you just tell us a little bit about your role at the Des Moines Partnership.
Sure. So as Kathy said, I'm at the Greater Des Moines Partnership, and really my title is kind of unique. I don't know that there's actually a title out there, but it is a startup community builder. And so what that really means is I get to work with our entrepreneur community. Specifically, I work with entrepreneurs one-on-one. I help them try to speed up their success if they're in the idea stage, all the way to if they're trying to grow and expand into a different market. And then on the community side to that is making sure, working with a lot of partners across central Iowa to make sure we have the right ingredients for an entrepreneur community to be vibrant and to make it a lot easier for entrepreneurs to live here.
That is such a great, I think, resource that I'm not sure even some people know about. So, number one, great information for folks. Now, specifically, we're going to talk about this 12-person team you're part of, and you guys are participating in the MIT Regional Entrepreneurship Acceleration Program.
Yep.
So we're going to go into that, which I think when I was reading about it is a really it's a pretty cool opportunity, and I think you're part of a group that gets together that I saw has 4 different countries and then some Midwestern cities. So tell us about it, but it's really unique.
Yeah, so actually the Kauffman Foundation, which is really known for entrepreneurship education, research, data, they reached out to Des Moines here and including St. Louis, Kansas City, Omaha, to actually be part of a 2-year program through MIT. And with that cohort, there's also then the 4 other countries: Hungary, the Dominican Republic, Western Australia, and Brazil. And so people typically, different countries, go through this 2-year program. It's all in the name of what, of course, MIT is great at with their acronyms in trying to accelerate your regional entrepreneurship development plan. And so that means looking at, okay, what are our short-term gaps right now for entrepreneurs, but also long-term, how do we think about that as we listen and talk to a lot of different stakeholders within the community. So that's a little bit about it. And then specifically Des Moines, we actually extended that out to Ames. And so the 12 stakeholders that are in our Des Moines team is actually a makeup of Des Moines and Ames investors, entrepreneurs, corporate leaders, government as well, and then the missing one, our universities, of course.
Yeah. So. Okay, great. And actually, you just hit on one of the things that I learned about when I was looking at information about the project is that there are actually these 5 stakeholder groups when we're talking entrepreneurship.
Yep.
And I think sometimes you don't even think about the need and the place for all of those. So can you name them one more time for us so we can just get thinking about that a little more?
So entrepreneurs, of course, like they are still at the center because you have to have entrepreneurs to have an entrepreneur community. But as well as investors, this could be debt, equity investments. It might even be grants. And then, of course, government partners. There's corporate partners. And then there is the university or school partners, education.
Yeah, a lot of different pieces make it up. So where do we stand right now as it relates to business success for entrepreneurs in Iowa? Because I know, sometimes I've heard probably statements or something, that's a really difficult thing to sustain over time. So where does Iowa stand?
Yeah, so actually when you started off with this episode, you really touched on it that Iowa is affordable. It's a great place to live, but it's actually also a great place to create a business. And I was looking this up right before our conversation here, is that the percentage of businesses that are still active after 1 year of opening in Iowa, that percentage is 83%.
Wow.
And it's actually higher than the national average. So, so we actually have a really great place here in Iowa for entrepreneurs to build a business. And so I think that's important to know. And there's probably many ways you could dice that as to why. But that also goes into showing that we have a really strong community of support here. And it's really close access pretty much to anyone if you ever need, an introduction made, especially when you're just getting started.
Yeah, I think that's so cool. One thing that I was thinking when you were talking about your position in particular is, do you have people who are just like have an idea and want to talk through things, all the way to people who've already done a business plan and are? I mean, where along that continuum, how do people get connected with you?
Honestly, we get a lot of people that just reach out, whether that's through phone call and email. Also, we have referrals, of course, just because there are so many entrepreneur support organizations that do exist and can make those referrals when necessary. So first thing is people reach out, and that's always the first step for anyone with an idea. And you're right, it does range from anyone that literally they're trying to figure out, is this a problem worth solving? Do I actually have customers in this market, or what I believe is this market? And then all the way to trying to, access capital, access even sites and building locations, and then even to creating different models, business models. So it really ranges depending on the entrepreneur.
One question that just came to mind that I'm curious about is, of all the folks that you're working with across that continuum, is there a trend, do you see right now, anywhere between like the ages of folks who are starting this? That I'm just curious about that.
It's really all over.
That's good to know, because something for everyone. Yes,
it depends who also is referring. So, like, say a university or a college, a school is trying to get a connection made. It's likely going to be a younger person starting a business. But then I also say there's a lot of second acts where someone might have retired from their career, but actually has such an expertise in something that they want to create a business out of it. So it ranges all the way from, as young as 13 years old to, 70 plus.
That's so cool. Very, very cool. Okay, so, and that's maybe one of the trends. The other thing that I wanted to ask next was, what are some other trends in central Iowa right now that you see?
Yeah, so coming after the pandemic, we saw a lot of people create these side businesses in relation to their full-time job. And so now is a really unique time where some people actually made that jump into full-time entrepreneurship during the pandemic, and then those businesses are still sustaining. Otherwise, as you know, it's a very tight labor market too, and so we're seeing, are those businesses going to stick around or not? But what I've also seen kind of throughout this business transition time, and businesses are always transitioning, especially existing businesses, but there's a unique time for people to actually be buyers of businesses, and that's kind of that, whether you're a first-time founder or business owner, there are a lot of towns and communities that I think are looking for entrepreneurs to kind of buy into that business that is already really well ran, but just needs a new owner or maybe a new perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Again, just another aspect that probably not often thought about unless your head's right in that space, because I get the opportunity to travel to a lot of different towns in Iowa. And, I love, especially when you go around their main street or their square and you see all the unique different stores they've had. And like you said, sometimes for years and years. So those are opportunities too.
Yep.
To give to another person, somebody looking to step in and really something already successful that they can build on. So that's so cool. All right, so next question. We read in the information that Iowa tends to be somewhat risk adverse. So can you talk about that a little bit when it comes to entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so I would say Des Moines specifically, sometimes we think of just being an insurance and a financial capital here. I would say we're very risk managed, where we evaluate the different types of risk. And it's the same thing as someone decides, okay, am I going to pursue this new career in entrepreneurship and kind of give away all that I was maybe used to in this former life of being employed somewhere. And so that's where we tend to score a little low as we compare ourselves to other Midwest states, is the actual rate of people starting businesses in Iowa. And we only have, 3 million people here. So that's something that we kind of keep an eye on. And I think as it relates to that, maybe one of the themes there is that people need to perceive entrepreneurship as a pathway for them, which is why I'm excited to be on this podcast even and talking about this, because sometimes people don't even realize that it's a choice. Or they might not even realize what they're doing is business ownership, and is actually entrepreneurship. Typically, people either fall into entrepreneurship because they're trying to solve a problem that they've identified, or they're very passionate about something and they typically have like a skill set that then they pursue that on to, okay, maybe I could do this and start selling these things or these services. So that's just something that I think we need to amplify a little bit more, is actually the storytelling component and showing people of all types of people, diversity especially, that they too can be in those roles of being an entrepreneur.
Yeah,
So.
I think that is, I agree. I think it's something, yes, we need to raise the discussion a little bit and make all these opportunities and resources that you're talking about aware to people, and really encourage that thought process for somebody who fits that bill, because where would we be without our cool entrepreneurial, businesses and our small businesses and our unique things that are available because people are sharing their talents.
Yeah.
So,
and I would even say too that even when you look at the scheme of all businesses, even our biggest employers of 5,000 employees plus, at one point they had an entrepreneur and an idea, and so that's just something that we kind of really need to remember, even as we're growing big businesses to small businesses, is that it takes someone to take a risk and to try to solve a problem.
Yes,
So.
definitely. And it sounds like we have the makeup here to support people in doing that. So that's the other exciting part. So what are some of the most creative startups that you have seen?
Yeah. So creative is, depending on the eye of the
Sure.
beholder, of course. I think there's a lot of interesting startup activity happening in Des Moines and central Iowa. Creative could mean the business model is creative and unique. So a couple of companies that I know I've worked with or have been around, Hummingbirds is doing something really unique. They've created this platform where small business to medium enterprises can use local people to be their influencers, and use the value of trust that gets created through that. We also have, businesses like Wander Women who are teaching people about the outdoors and providing these experiences through guided women-specific trips. And then, of course, RoboFlow. I think of RoboFlow as a company that is really bringing all the convergence of these technologies that we hear about, like AI, machine learning, and they're creating a platform for people to be able to quickly analyze different images, and using that in big companies that we all know and would recognize, to small startups even. So there's quite a few different startups that we have around here. But I would also say that creative startups or businesses can just even be creative in their own right of how they market something. And so it kind of depends on how you think about that in this question.
Yeah,
So.
that those are so cool. I love those examples, and it made me think. So, if somebody was like just looking to see what are the startups or these type of businesses, what's around here?
Yeah.
Do you guys have a web page, or how can people like go see what are these new businesses that are happening?
Yeah. So, a couple ideas there is every month I actually produce a digest of different startups to kind of follow in Iowa. So that's called Startup Iowa Hot List. And really, it kind of got its name of, okay, these are just companies to follow as we see they're raising funding, as we see closed rounds of funding. Not all of it is related to capital, but it's all covering Iowa. So that's one way to find it is just Startup Iowa Hot List. You can Google that. But also our Des Moines Partnership. Through our website, we do tons of different storytelling components. I actually co-host a podcast called the Small Business and Startup Stories DSM. So you can check that out, and you can hear kind of the how I built this framework behind a lot of these startups that I mentioned.
That is so great.
Yeah.
Such good information. I am so glad you're here too, Diana, because this is stuff people need to know. So, okay, let's see. How about, I think the question is, what are some of the areas to improve entrepreneurship in Iowa? The opportunities. So tell me now what's, what comes to mind, and then I kind of have a couple questions around that.
Yeah. So there's probably many ways to think about that. We already talked about one is kind of this cultural perception of entrepreneurship being a career choice. I think there's that improvement of application of storytelling. I do still think there is our early stage funding for startups can be sometimes a little fragile or volatile even. And so that's kind of a component that many of us look at and kind of monitor is how is access to capital going for small businesses and startups. And then an interesting area I think that could be improved or even just dialed up a little bit more is our corporate engagement within the startup community. So corporates and existing businesses, if you're listening, you guys have a lot to actually offer to the startup and entrepreneur community. And sometimes that's channel partners, sometimes that's being a first customer, and it might even be an investment too. So that's something that trying to figure out ways and strategies to improve in our community here.
Good. I think another way for employers, as you said, and businesses to get involved in supporting different entities in their community and that they may not be thinking about. And I know they're very busy right now because always looking for workers, but this is, I think this is a great thing that they might want to consider as well. So
yeah, especially actually on the talent side and retention. Sometimes when you can offer your employees this ability to mentor and be an expert in their proven field, but outside of your company, I think that's a really easy leverage point for existing businesses to actually have this contact with founders and entrepreneurs just because they need that. And likewise, both sides to that.
Yep,
so.
That is a great idea. And retention is a big issue. So definitely something that people want to consider. How can employers and community organizations find out more information about entrepreneurship, data, and resources? Oh, and on that, I wanted to say I did look at, because part of what you guys are doing is the dashboard, right? And that was really interesting. So I want to encourage people to go, you'll talk about that in a minute, but it has some really good, interesting information on it.
Yeah. And so what Kathy's talking about is the Iowa Innovation Dashboard. This was a project we launched last year. And essentially it shows what's happening in our startup and entrepreneurship community as a whole state. And so some of the interesting findings in there does have like the data around, what is the business survival rate? What is our rate of new entrepreneurs starting businesses? You can even go in there by county to see how many active business filings there are. And then also it relates to capital and R&D and employment as well. So that's a new project we started last year. You can find that if anyone's interested at IowaInnovationDashboard.com. And we actually update that twice a year. So by the end of June, July time, we'll actually have an updated version of some of those data sets.
That's great. Now, a couple more things just before we let you go. Diana, what investing and the funds to start something, that's something that I think can be just off the bat intimidating for people, but it feels like, as we've talked, there are resources and people who can connect with people and help to try and, figure that out. So you're not alone, and if you have an idea, then, maybe bring it forth. But what are some of the ways people find investors, just for example?
Yeah, and so I think it's first good to understand what someone defines as an investor. So When you're talking about trying to find capital, I think it's good to know the costs of the different capital out there. So, of course, we've heard of grants, which means you are not getting any equity taken out of and you don't owe any money back. That's the best kind. But there's also debt financing, and there's many different, whether it's community banks or different lending programs, even state programs as well, that lends to small businesses. And then there is equity finance, and so that is typically where you hear this word investors. And investors that typically want to see a 3 to 10x on their return. So you have to be very mindful when you're trying to actually receive equity finance, just because not all businesses are going to fit that model. And sometimes it's not good for all businesses either, depending on how you want your ownership set up. But in general, when you're trying to find investors, there are actually a lot of different angel investor groups here in Central Iowa. There's venture capital, which is usually a fund. And I know, for example, the state just launched the InnoVenture Fund, a $30 million venture capital fund. And especially in these areas and environments, people are looking for that return. So that's one way, is honestly asking people, like, you can specifically reach out to me. I have a whole list of all the different types of investors. And some investors actually are very dedicated to the industries too. So we have a lot of ag tech investors here. We have a lot of insurance and financial service investors, which just makes a lot of sense for Iowa based on kind of what we're known at. But also friends and families. So never don't forget your friends and families, because a lot of times the people who you know that are in your network actually might want to take a risk and help you out in starting a business.
Very good.
Yeah.
So, all right, before we wrap it up, I want to just, again, pitch what you talked about, the Startup Iowa Hot List, right? And they can just Google that.
Yep.
Okay, and then you do the podcast on small businesses and startup stories.
Yep. How
do they find that? Is it on the Greater Des Moines Partnership website? Or?
Yeah. So we our website is dsmpartnership.com. We have a whole area for entrepreneurship. So you just type in dsmpartnership.com/entrepreneurship. You can find our podcast. You can find the dashboard. You can even just find all the different resources available.
Do they find a link to you there too?
Yep.
Okay,
We're
great.
also on there too.
Great, because you know what? Somebody may catch something, I hope, in the podcast and then just want to follow up for more information. So I definitely encourage people to reach out to you, Diana.
Yep. And I'm always happy to have a coffee, to have a Zoom, depending on where someone's located.
Great. So check it out, folks. I want to thank you so much for your time today, Diana. That was fantastic. And this wraps up our show on the great entrepreneurship opportunities in Central Iowa. We'll see you again on the next episode of Mission Employable. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Diana.
Yep. Thank you.